Good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday. Yay. Wait, no, today might be Wednesday. Sorry, I'm filming this on a day that you aren't going to see it. So I think today's Wednesday. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Oh well. I already got up and worked out today and then showered, so I feel pretty productive. I hopefully that you have been productive as well, or maybe you're just rolling out of bed and that's okay too. Got my coffee. We're here for Read Aloud. Yesterday was such an interesting day of Read Aloud because, ooh, that's hot. Jacob and Emma met, they snuck out, remember, to meet each other, and there was that one guy who was like spying on him, so he thought that he got caught and he was just gonna say like, oh, I was going out, just to do whatever. Obviously he's not gonna say that he's sneaking out to go see someone from a different time period. And they went down into the shipwreck, remember that? And at the end, Emma was trying to convince Jacob to stay there with them, like in their time period. And Jacob was saying like, no, I'm not, I don't fit in. I'm not like you guys. And she told him, you are peculiar because normal people cannot go through the loop and you can. And also, let's see. And then she said, oh, it was so good at the end, you guys. She said, I doubt that very much, she replied. Abe had a rare and peculiar talent, something almost no one else could do. And then she met my eyes and said, he could see the monsters. So that was the cliffhanger that the author left us on at the end of chapter 8. So I have so many questions. What are these monsters? Why could Grandpa Portman see them? Why can't anyone else see them? And was that his only gift? And also, can Jacob do that too? Ooh, so many questions. Okay, so we're gonna get started with chapter 9. Let me share my screen with you and then we'll get started, okay? All right. Whew, I'm so excited to move on. I feel like we're finally getting to good parts. It's early this morning, so it's a little bit dark in here still, but I think you guys can still see that, right? All right. Oh, my timer. You guys probably hate when I set my timer, huh? Because then I'm going to stop reading at a certain point. You just want to keep reading and keep reading and keep reading, huh? All right, here we go. He could see the monsters. The moment she said it, all the horrors I thought I'd put behind me came flooding back. They were real. They were real, and they'd killed my grandfather. Ooh, he's making the connection that there are monsters, and they're the ones that killed Grandpa Portman. Oh my gosh, you guys. I can see them too, I told her, whispering it like a secret shame. Her eyes welled and she embraced me. I knew there was something peculiar about you, she said, and I mean that as the highest compliment. I'd always known I was strange. I never dreamed I was peculiar, but if I could see things almost no one else could, it explained why Ricky hadn't seen anything in the woods the night my grandfather was killed. Ooh, I'm remembering when he found Grandpa Portman in the woods that day. Remember, he heard something, so he shone his flashlight at it, and he saw something, some type of monster or something. But remember that his friend Ricky, gosh, it's been forever since we saw Ricky, he didn't see anything. It explained why everyone thought I was crazy. I wasn't crazy or seeing things or having a stress reaction. The panicky twist in my gut whenever they were close, and that the awful sight of them was my gift. Oh gosh, and you can't see them at all? I asked her. Only their shadows, which is why they mainly hunt at night. Ooh, oh my gosh, so we're finding out so much right now that Emma can see their shadows. She can't see them, but she can see their shadows, which is why the monsters hunt at night, because there's no sunlight, which makes them not have any shadows. Oh my gosh. Are you guys excited? As excited right now as I am? I feel like we're finally getting so much more information and it's only been half of the page. What's stopping them from coming after you right now? I asked, then corrected myself. All of us, I mean. She turned serious. They don't know where to find us. That and they can't enter loops. So we're safe on the island, but we can't leave. But Victor did. Ooh, we're finding out what happened to Victor now. She nodded sadly. He said he was going mad here, said he couldn't stand it any longer. Poor Bronwyn. My Abe left too, but at least he wasn't murdered by hollows. I forced myself to look at her. I'm really sorry to have to tell you this. What? Oh no. They convinced me it was wild animals. But if what you're saying is true, my grandfather was murdered by them too. The first and only time I saw one was the night he died. She hugged her knees to her chest and closed her eyes. I slid my arm around her, and she tilted her head against mine. I knew they'd get him eventually, she whispered. He promised me he'd be safe in America, that he could protect himself. But we're never safe, none of us, not really. We sat talking on the wrecked ship until the moon got low and the water lapped at our throats and Emma began to shiver. Then we linked hands and waded back to the canoe. Paddling towards the beach, we heard voices calling our names, and then we came around a rock and saw Hugh and Fiona waving at us from the shore. Even from a distance, it was clear something was wrong. Oh my gosh, something was wrong. We tied the canoe and ran to meet them. Hugh was out of breath, bees darting around him in a state of agitation. Something's happened. You've got to come back with us. There was no time to argue. Emma pulled her clothes over her swimsuit, and I tripped into my pants, all gritty with sand. Hugh regarded me certainly. Not him, though, he said. This is serious. No, Hugh, Emma said. The bird was right. He's one of us. He gaped at her, then at me. You told him? I had to. He practically worked it out for himself anyway. Hugh seemed taken aback for a moment and then turned and gave me a resolute handshake. Then welcome to the family. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, thanks. On the way to the house, we gleaned sketchy bits of information from Hugh about what had happened, but mostly we just ran. When we stopped in the woods to catch our breath, he said, it's one of the bird's inbred friends. She winged in about an hour ago in a terrible state, yelling blue murder and rousing everyone from their beds. Before we could understand what she was getting at, she fainted off dead. He wrung his hands, looking miserable. Oh, I just know something wicked's happened. I hope you're wrong, said Emma, and we ran on. In the hall just outside of the sitting room's closed door, children in rumpled nightclothes huddled around a kerosene lantern, trading rumors about what might have happened. Perhaps they forgot to reset their loop, Claire said. Bet you it was the Hollows, Enoch said. Bet they ate a lot of them, too, right down to their boots. Claire and Olive wailed and clapped their little hands over their faces. Horace knelt down beside them and said in a comforting voice, There, don't let Enoch fill your heads with rubbish. Everyone knows Hollows like young ones best. That's why they let Miss Peregrine's friend go. She tastes like old coffee grounds. Olive peeked from behind her fingers. What do young ones taste like? Ugh. Lingonberries, he said matter-of-factly. The girls wailed again. Leave them alone, Hugh shouted, and a squadron of bees sent Horace yelping down the hall. What's going on out there? Miss Peregrine called from inside the sitting room. Is that Mr. Appiston I hear? Where are Miss Bloom and Mr. Portman? Emma cringed and shot Hugh a nervous look. She knows? When she found out you were gone, she just about went off her chump. Thought you'd been abducted by wits or some barminess. Sorry, Em, I had to tell her. By whites. Remember, I looked that word up. I'm sorry, I keep pronouncing it wrong. It's whites. Emma shook her head, but all we could do was go in and face the music. Fiona gave us a little salute, as if to wish us luck, and we opened the doors. Inside the sitting room, the only light was a hearth fire that threw our quivering shadows against the wall. Bronwyn hovered anxiously around an old woman who was teetering half-conscious in a chair, mummied up in a blanket. Miss Peregrine sat on an ottoman, feeding the woman spoonfuls of dark liquid. So someone else is there, some old woman. When Emma saw her face, she froze. Oh my God, she whispered. It's Miss Avocet. Only then did I recognize her, though just barely, from the photograph Miss Peregrine had showed me of herself as a young girl. Miss Avocet had seemed so indomitable then, but now she looked frail and weak. As we stood watching, Miss Peregrine brought a silver flask to Miss Avocet's lips and tipped it. And for a moment, the elder Imbrin seemed to revive. sitting forward with brightened eyes, but then her expression dulled again and she sank back into the chair. Miss Bruntley, said Miss Peregrine to Bronwyn, go and make up the fainting couch for Miss Avocet, and then fetch a bottle of cocoa wine and another flask of brandy. Bronwyn trooped out, nodding solemnly as they passed. Next, Miss Peregrine turned to us and said in a low voice, I am tremendously disappointed in you, Miss Bloom, tremendously, and of all the nights to sneak away. I'm sorry, miss, but how was I to know something bad would happen? I should punish you. However, given the circumstances, it hardly seems worth the effort. She raised a hand and smoothed her mentor's right hair. Miss Avocet would have never left her wards to come here unless something dire had taken place. The roaring fire made beads of sweat break out on my forehead. But in her chair, Miss Avocet lay shivering. Would she die? Was the tragic scene that had played out between my grandfather and me about to play out again, this time between Miss Peregrine and her teacher? I pictured it, me holding my grandfather's body, terrified and confused, never suspecting the truth about him or myself. What was happening now, I decided, was nothing like what happened to me. Miss Peregrine had always known who she was. It hardly seemed like the time to bring it up, but I was angry and couldn't help myself. Miss Peregrine, I began, and she looked up. When were you going to tell me? She was about to ask what, but then her eyes went to Emma, and she seemed to read the answer on her face. For a moment she looked mad, and then she saw my anger, and her own soon faded. Soon, lad, please understand, to have laid the entire truth upon you at our first meeting would have been an awful shock. Your behavior was unpredictable. You might have fled, never to return. I can't take that risk. So instead, you tried to seduce me with food and fun and girls while keeping all the bad things to a secret. Emma gasped. Oh, please, don't think of that. Don't think that of me, Jacob. I couldn't bear it. I fear you've badly misjudged us, said Miss Peregrine. As for seducing you, what you've seen is how we live. There has been no deception, only the withholding of a few facts. Well, here's a fact for you, I said. One of those creatures killed my grandfather. Miss Peregrine stared at the fire for a moment. I'm very sorry to hear that. I saw one with my own eyes. When I told people about it, they tried to convince me I was crazy, but I wasn't, and neither was my grandfather. His whole life he'd been telling me the truth, and I didn't believe him. Shame flooded over me. If I had, maybe he'd still be alive. Miss Peregrine saw that I was wobbling and offered me the chair across from Miss Avocet. I sat, and Emma knelt down beside me. Abe must have known you were peculiar, she said, and he must have had good reason for not telling you. He did indeed know, replied Miss Peregrine. He said as much in a letter. Ooh, so he knew. That's interesting. I don't understand then. If it was all true, all his stories, and if he knew I was like him, why did he keep it a secret until the last minute of his life? Miss Peregrine spoon-fed more brandy to Miss Avocet, who groaned and sat up a little before settling back into the chair. I can only imagine that he wanted to protect you, she said. Ours can be a life of trials and deprivations. Abe's life was doubly so because he was born a Jew in the worst of times. He faced a double genocide of Jews by the Nazis and of peculiars by the Holocaust. He was tormented by the idea that he was hiding here while his people, both Jews and peculiars, were being slaughtered. He used to say he'd gone to war to fight monsters, I said. He did, said Emma. The war ended the Nazis' rule, but the Holocaust emerged stronger than ever, Miss Peregrine continued. So, like many peculiars, we remain in hiding. But your grandfather returned a changed man. He'd become a warrior, and he was determined to build a life for himself outside the loop. He refused to hide. I begged him not to go to America, Emma said. We all did. Why did he choose America? I asked. It had few hologausts at the time, Miss Peregrine replied. After the war, there was a minor exodus of peculiars to America. For a while, many were able to pass as common as your grandfather did. It was his fondest wish to be common, to live a common life. He often mentioned it in his letters. I'm sure that's why he kept the truth from you for so long. He wanted for you what he could never have for himself. To be ordinary, I said. Miss Peregrine nodded. But he could never escape his peculiarity. His unique skill, coupled with the prowess he'd honed during the war as a hunter of hollows, made him too valuable. He was often pressed into service, asked to eradicate troublesome pockets of hollows. His nature was such that he rarely refused. I thought about all of the long hunting trips Grandpa Portman used to go on. My family had a picture of him taken during one of these, though I don't know who took it or when, since he almost always went alone. But when I was a kid, I thought it was the funniest thing because in the picture he was wearing a suit. Who wears a suit on a hunting trip? Now I know. Someone who's hunting more than just animals. Who's that picture? Ooh, I think we're going to end at a perfect spot because we've got about 2 more minutes left to read. I was moved by this new idea of my grandfather, not as a paranoid gun nut or a secretive philanderer or a man who wasn't there for his family, but as a wandering knight who risked his life for others, living out of cars and cheap motels, stalking lethal shadows, coming home shy, a few bullets and marked with bruises he could never quite explain, and nightmares he couldn't talk about. For his many sacrifices, he received only scorn and suspicion from those he loved. I guess that's why he wrote so many love letters to Emma and Miss Peregrine. They understood. Bronwyn returned with a decanter of cocoa wine and another flask of brandy. Miss Peregrine sent her away and set about mixing them together in a teacup. Then she began to pat Miss Avocet gently on her blue-veined cheek. Esmeralda, she said, Esmeralda, you must rouse yourself and drink this tonic I've prepared. Miss Avocet moaned, and Miss Peregrine raised the teacup to her lips. The old woman took a few sips, and, though she sputtered and coughed, most of the purplish liquid disappeared down her throat. For a moment she stared, as if about to sink back into her stupor, but then she sat forward, face brightening. Oh my, she said, her voice a dry rasp. Had I fallen asleep? How indecorous of me. She looked at us in mild surprise, as if we had appeared out of nowhere. Alma, is that you? Miss Peregrine kneaded the old woman's bony hands. Esmeralda, you've come a long way to see us in the dead of night. I'm afraid you got us all terribly worked up. Have I? Miss Avocet squinted and furrowed her brow, and her eyes seemed to fix on the opposite wall, alive with flickering shadows. Then a haunted expression stole her face. Yes, she said. I've come to warn you, Alma. You must be on your guard. You mustn't allow yourself to be taken by surprise, as I was. Miss Peregrine stopped, kneading. By what? They could only have been whites. A pair of them came into the night, disguised as council members. There are no male council members, of course, but it fooled my sleep day's wards just long enough for the whites to bind them and drag them away. Miss Peregrine gasped. Oh, Esmeralda! Miss Bunting and I were awoken by their anguished cries, she explained, but we found ourselves barricaded inside the house. It took some time to force the doors, but when we did and followed the whites sink out of the loop, there was a gang of shadow beasts lying in wait on the other side. They fell upon us, howling. She stopped, choking back tears. And the children? Miss Avocet shook her head. All the light seemed to have gone out of her eyes. The children were merely bait, she said. Emma slid her hand in mine and squeezed, and I saw Miss Peregrine's cheeks glisten in the firelight. It was Miss Bunting and myself whom they wanted. I was able to escape, but Miss Bunting was not so fortunate. She was killed? No, abducted, just as Miss Wren and Miss Treekeeper were when their loops were invaded a fortnight ago. They're taking Ambrins, Alma. It's some sort of coordinated effort. For what purpose, I shudder to imagine. Then they'll come for us, too, Miss Peregrine said quietly. If they can find you, replied Miss Avocet. You are better hiding than most, but you must be ready, Alma. Miss Peregrine nodded. Miss Avocet looked helplessly at her hands, trembling in her lap like a broken-winged bird. Her voice began to hitch. Oh, my dear children, pray for them. They are all alone now. And she turned away and wept. Miss Peregrine pulled the blanket around the old woman's shoulders and rose. We followed her out, leaving Miss Avocet to her grief. Okay, we're at a break, so we're gonna stop there because our timer went off. Um, let's just debrief. So Miss Avocet is there, and she's explaining that the whites came and disguised themselves and took the kids, and the Embrins, like Miss Peregrine, chase after them, and her partner was abducted. Now, Miss Avocet was able to get away. So there are two different like monsters that they're talking about right now. One is the hollows, and one are the whites. So the hollows can't go through the loop. So when Miss Avocet went through the loop to go rescue the children, there were a bunch of hollows there, and I guess that the whites can. Okay, we don't really know much about them yet, and what they look like, and what they do, and what they want. But I'm assuming we'll get there soon because Miss Peregrine's going to have to start explaining herself. Okay, we'll read more tomorrow. Bye bye.